This is the Move the World podcast, interviews with people dedicated to making the world a better place, with your host, George Siegel. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Move the World podcast. Now, our goal with this podcast is every week to introduce you to someone who is doing something in their career or in their personal life to help move the world. And I have a great guest today who embodies that. His name is Joel May, and for over 3 decades, Joel has worked in many fast-paced construction sectors focused on product manufacturing, inspection, insurance risk, build design, and renovation, with deep focus on building materials research and development. All of this is based on resilience, lean thinking, building science, energy, and environmental performance. With that, welcome, Joel May. Thank you so much for being here. And what we left off in your introduction is probably the most important thing you've done in your career. Is you were a huge star of our documentary film, The Last House Standing, not just in the contribution to what you said, but the people you connected me with and everything. So welcome.
Thank you, George, so much for having me. And it was an absolute pleasure to been a part of The Last House Standing. If those viewers out there who haven't seen it yet, please take a look. It's very impactful, very insightful. And again, I can't thank you enough for allowing me to be a part of that.
Well, the feeling is very mutual. Now, in your introduction, it talked about some very significant things. So if somebody came up to you and said, Joel May, what do you do to move the world? What would you say?
Well, I would look up the history book and talk to our good friend Archimedes. And if I had a big enough lever, I could move the world. But in all seriousness, with disasters like weather, food scarcity, pandemics, we all need very big levers, or we need a lot of hands to move that lever, to be more specific. But what I do to move the world is really collaborate. I'm a connector, whether it's working with government, non-government organizations, insurance community, the designers out there that design our structures, contractors that build it. I work in that space that forces me and those I work with to prove that the products, the buildings, the infrastructure we build is safe, strong, and offers other sustainable economic benefits. So by connecting all these folks together, I find ways to get things done that normally you wouldn't see 2 different disciplines working together. For example, energy efficiency and hurricane resistance. So that's just one of the ways I move the world. And I've kind of stumbled into this world, being into that, as you mentioned, 3 decades into construction. And I've been on a journey, definitely a student, always learning. And again, the collaboration has really been the biggest benefit.
Now, we see different examples as from the consumer end, from the public, which would be where I consider myself, because I'm certainly not an expert on any of this stuff that you do. We are so dependent on people that we think are smarter than us to design things. We saw that tragic building collapse in South Florida. We saw all the damage from Ida this past week, that people living in these structures just really have no idea what risks they're facing. How do we combat that?
Well, just like your own medical health or what you put in your body or the car you choose to drive, you have to do your own due diligence. Sure, there are agencies out there, government, non-government, they do provide some services, but it's really up to you, the individual, to know your risk, know what you're about to walk into, buy, or rent, and ask those questions and dig very, very deep. Because with technology today, it is very easy to research something, a person, an individual, but it's really hard to get down to the heart of that matter and that history. So one of the things I often tell folks, if they're looking to buy a home, for example, you can go to your local municipality, call, send an email and say, I'd like the record on 123 Smith Street. Give me the building records if you have them, any inspection, open tickets, any history. And that's just one way to start. Same thing with renting. Before you're renting, as you mentioned, this horrible collapse, there's some history on that garage structure that is all over the city at the municipal office that anyone could have found out before they rent. And I know that may sound a little bit, silly, but I had mentioned before, folks buy cars, they put more time and research into what type of tires they have, what does the stereo do, if they have air conditioning, than they do about where they're going to live, work, or even purchase. And the funny thing is, George, is that home you purchase or that place you live, that's something that can appreciate and then will impact your life greatly. But when you pull a car off a lot, it instantly depreciates. But yet it seems to be a little easier, or folks have that tendency to, ask those right questions when, purchasing an automobile. So kind of put that in perspective and use that frame of mind when you're looking for a place to live, work, or stay.
Yeah, I stole that analogy the other day when I was doing another podcast because I had heard that from you originally. Now, to me, though, also the tragic collapse in South Florida. We're not really going to talk a lot about that because I know there's all kinds of stuff going on with that. But what it highlights is if you're in a condo or an apartment, it's actually harder for you as an individual to get things done than it is in your own house. So if you're in a house, you can really be a little more in control of your destiny, can't you? So obviously you could let your condo board know, you could voice your concerns, but in a house, you can take action yourself.
That's true, but both are actually true. And depending on where you live, there are 13 states, mostly coastal in the U.S., that have to go through certain certifications. So there are records on the buildings, whether you're buying or selling or even trying to purchase insurance. And knowing what type of insurance you need. There's many different mechanisms there. So whether you're meeting a real estate agent, doing your own due diligence online, using some of the apps like Trulia or Zello, there are lots of things you can find. For example, technology has made it easy for folks to know if they live in a special flood zone or just a non-risk flood zone in these apps like Zello. You can open up the listing and it'll literally tell you there that there's an issue. And even if you don't find it there and you're near water, you can, of course, go to that next step, speak to an insurance agent locally, and they will let you know just by typing in your address what your risks are. And in the past, flood zones and other wind zones haven't really been as well updated, but recently, post Sandy and Harvey, the federal government, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have tripled down on their efforts to make sure. And then again, technology like LiDAR and drones have shown topography and given us that 100, 500, 1,000 year floodplain and made it more accurate. So it's been good and bad. It's shown us that we live in a lot more risk, which is good. But the bad news is what was inexpensive flood insurance can now be quite crippling. And a lot of folks don't budget for that when they look at the life cycle costs of owning or renting.
Well, what seems to be really tragic too, Joel, that we saw it with Harvey, and I think we're going to hear it as the stories come out from Ida, is people lived in an area where they probably could have got flood insurance pretty inexpensively because they might not have been in an actual flood zone. And that to me is where people really, just because you don't live by the coast doesn't mean you don't have to be concerned about hazards, because what hits as a hurricane along the Gulf quite often finds its way in the mid-Atlantic or the Northeast, and then they're dealing with it.
Yes, and absolutely. And these things don't really show themselves until you see that slow moving, swirling storm sitting over dumping 5 inches in under an hour. Then you find out infrastructure, rivers, ravines, spillways that have never been overwhelmed are now overwhelmed. And that's a part of what's happening. Our society is growing, and whether it is the coastal, which most people are moving to big cities in the coastal, or you're in the middle of nowhere, you still have risk based on how that land at once was established. Or Mississippi Valley, for example, there's plenty of illustrations. If you were to go to FEMA.gov and explore water, the NFIP National Flood Insurance Program, It has wonderful films you can watch on where people had started off on the outskirts but moved in closer to the river basin because it was dry for so long historically. And they built roads and they put in more housing and more retail and potentially even some factories. And then here comes the flood. And before you know it, you are under 5-6 feet of water. And we're just seeing, because of climate chaos, more and more moisture events, more and more very quick, very powerful moving storms, which are even pushing water, as you mentioned, in different places, coming up the backside. I don't really think, George, there is a safe place in the U.S. where you wouldn't be affected by some type of man-made or natural disaster. So,
is it too much governmental overreach to say, okay, this place is just not a safe place to live? People have to relocate. I mean, I think if you look at Louisiana, and it's quite often folks that have had homes for generations that are right by the coast or in a very dangerous area, and to just displace them, but they get damaged. Last year, Louisiana had 4 hurricanes. This year, I think it's 2, but they just recently got hit by a pretty bad one with Ida. What do we do in those instances?
well, that's a great question, George. And there's really 2 parts to it. The first part is looking at those folks that feel this is my property, this is my land. I've lived with floods for generations, and I'm not leaving, frankly. And we've sent boats in, we've sent in relief, and typically these disaster declarations are their salvation, which ultimately is not a great strategy because that's our taxpayer money. You and I are paying for that to put them whole again, to only be destroyed. Government's getting a little bit better about saying, hey, this is your 5th, 10th time. We are either going to build this area up or you will be forced to be left alone and a person on their own island, literally and figuratively. So that is changing, but we are America. We do not leave people behind, especially during a disaster. There will always be relief. The government will always intervene, and non-government organizations. It's only through education and saying, look, you may have been here for, ever, but the topography, the land has changed. And frankly, it would be better served to leave you as a wetland so that we can save thousands of potential lives and billions of dollars with a B. Convincing people to do that is really the trick. So the other side of that answer is we have to have technology, be it building materials, which I'm intimately familiar with, that can withstand floods, wildfire, seismic, that cost a little more, or there's really futuristic things from elevating a building on pylons to really a modular building, making these almost indestructible tornado shelters in a factory, then putting them in place in an area that more suits the conditions that they'll be around for those that don't or can't leave certain areas. We have built structures that will survive just about any type of weather condition. Well, heck, think about people that have lived in the sea or go to outer space. So we know it's possible, but it's only at what price, right? So yeah, I have seen and have heard, government saying, look, you can move out. These are your options here, but ultimately you're not going to get insurance. And if you are going to stay here, you have to have your own insurance. Otherwise, we're going to be very limited in what we can do for you.
Now, when I talk to you and other experts, you guys talk about all the amazing technologies that are in development or things that people are doing, the latest trends, but it doesn't seem to get down to the local builder in a lot of areas. I know I live in Florida, and when I drive around, I send you pictures from time to time, people building wood on second floors of houses, people putting apartment buildings up that are mostly wood, in an area that is ripe for a hurricane where I live. And so it doesn't seem like the message gets through. So when you're cranking on that lever, how do you get it to make a difference so these people actually find out about it and then use the technology?
So George, again, great question. The hands on that lever are the good guys, and there's a lot out there. Again, I like to say it's kind of a 3-legged stool. It's the people, the products, the processes. We'll start with the people. There are plenty of people out there. You can Google search for building in hurricane-prone areas, for example. There are insurance institutes that build, study, rate, have raters like myself that are all over the United States that are the good guys that want to combine best practices, local code, and they understand what you need, not only to build, but to retrofit. And to find one of those folks is really where you want to start, to consult with them. Again, you have to do your own diligence. You want to make sure you're next understanding what your options are. And unfortunately, today, people are really wowed by things like granite countertops or what type of flooring I'm going to get rather than how it performs. So by getting educated about performance, be it moisture, fire resistance, being, stronger for impact, these are the things that'll really help you weather the storm and actually, believe it or not, control your costs. People today tend to look at what's in front of them immediately. And when they really are starting to shop for that home, making those selections, they have to be able to put what's called life cycle together. And you may have heard that on, hey, buy a light bulb that's going to last forever and is very cheap. With resilience, you can actually sell those points, stronger walls. Not only are stronger walls more energy efficient, they can help you right size your heating and cooling equipment. So you may find an expert in disaster that may also say, hey, I'm also an energy person. Let's combine the two on what you're looking for and what you're going to buy. And you'll really save that money on not putting it into a giant heating and cooling system for your home when all you need is 1/10 of that because you built stronger and airtight. So these exchanges are very, very possible. You just have to find people out there that'll think outside of the box. And they are out there and they're growing in numbers. I believe the program called Fortified for Safer Living just completed its 30,000th fortified home, which means that building not only met standards, it had the products and the right people, and it was verified by a third party. So we're very proud of that in the industry, and we take our hats off to that organization and those out there in that same space, moving that lever together.
Yeah, it's awesome. I wish more of us heard about those things and could understand, because as we learned in making The Last House Standing, we were interviewing a builder in Moore, Oklahoma, where they had been hit by 4 major tornadoes, and then they changed the building code, and the cost of building the house better was like a couple dollars a square foot, a little less than that, which he said is equivalent to the granite countertops that you might put in a house. And I said, well, which would people choose if they had a choice? And he said most would probably still choose the granite countertops. And that's just mind-boggling to me.
Or both. We'd like both, please.
Well, most people are counting nickels. I know builders count nickels because you can walk around your house and find every place they saved a nickel. But with a homeowner, we have to get to a point where homeowners go, the cost of not doing it is far greater than paying a little more to do it better.
That's it, George. You hit the nail on the head, no pun intended. An analogy would be the taxi cab industry. They offered okay service. You got A to B. If you're ever in New York, boy, you were in for an adventure. You didn't know what it would cost and whatnot. When Uber came out and you had your smartphone in your hand, you could have your own personal driver there for a fraction of a taxi cab. It empowered the consumer to have choices, to rate their drive, to really finally but to have some say in how they get back and forth. And in some cases, it's people's only transportation. There are better apps coming out. There are things you can put on your smartphone to learn. Some of these disaster check sites like FEMA.gov have these things. So at the touch of your smartphone, you can find the right people, the right products, and even find out more information so that you are armed with that when you're meeting with your real estate professional or discussing things with a builder. I mean, literally, you could Google information like FEMA.gov and pages and pages of things come out, and you can zoom that right into your specific location, your specific questions. And if your builder doesn't know or your real estate agent doesn't know about it, you can pop this up. Case in point, my cousin in Michigan was buying a home. She had said to me, I want to make sure, we can afford this. We have a lot of kids, so on and so forth. I said, well, the only thing I'm worried about is you are in a flood zone. The agent said, oh, well, yeah, that's not really true. And if you do need insurance, it's only $200 maybe a year. And I said, well, that's not exactly true, because I know a little bit about this, and I know that they've redrawn this zone to special, and it's going to cost you quite a bit more because you're near this river. And lo and behold, the things in Michigan have just exploded. An area that has not seen flood ever has now been inundated with floods. And now that particular home's flood insurance is $12,000 a year. Factor in the life cycle. And that's because they had no mitigation, no flood vents. They didn't have any type of material that could withstand, and the structure itself could very well have been totally lost. So the risk was high, and the home wasn't built to a standard. And therefore, my cousin, taking the word of an agent, really got stuck with a property. Fortunately, she was able to unload it before apps like Zillow started saying, this is a flood zone. So at the point in time, who do you trust and how do you trust that person? Really, I say do your own due diligence. Ask everyone, ask a lot of questions. No one's ever ashamed to ask about the food they're going to eat on the meal, about that car they're going to get. You have to really come out of your shell when it comes to buying that home or renting that property.
Well, every story needs a villain. And if you were to pick out villains, and I know we don't like to single anybody out, but the people that you would not pick as your hero would be your realtor. They're there to make money. A lot of them have a great integrity and are very honest, but it's not their job to know everything that you, the homeowner, need to know. And the builder, that guy's trying to make a buck. And right. It would be great if they just were rewarded for building better houses. If they all had the same pride that some of them do, because I've been involved in a lot of construction of homes, and I'm always disappointed. I'm always going, wow, how could they have done this? How could they have done that? So we are the first line of defense. It's really got to start with the homeowner and then hope everybody else catches up. Wouldn't you think?
Oh, I would agree wholeheartedly. But what I'm seeing with builders, especially in places in the South where the building is still just booming and you're on a waiting list, folks really want to see more. They want smart homes that are integrated. They want a doorbell ring installed. You have to get furniture to sell your home. So literally, we're finding there's all of these extra things you need to be the builder of choice, if you will. Even some of these builders that are using job site cameras, if you're paying money to have a beautiful home built, you can see the progress in the steps as you build, and they use that as a marketing tool. Trust me, I'm a good builder, but if you don't, time to time, go to our live cam and you'll see the progress, which I think is fantastic because that leads us into the next step of using technology. We have gone together with other folks in collaboration and built neighborhoods using that same technology, time-lapse photography, body cam, where we have lessened the amount of businesses having to get in and inspect, and engineers signing off, code officials coming, going. We have limited, and this was before COVID, the amount of time it takes to build stronger, release funds, and finalize buildings by using technology. Because those cameras, your own personal camera is geotagged. As a matter of fact, after Hurricane Irma, I did an assessment with a group of experts. I took pictures of damaged roofs. I tagged them on Google with the longitude, latitude, and they are still up to date showing the devastating damage with tens of thousands of hits. So if you were to Google an address of this particular resort, you were going to see it during its worst times. Now, that's not always how it is. And I've even had owners of these resorts contact me via Google to please remove or add a better caption to my images. And I have, but I can't control what Google is going to show. I'm not optimizing it by any means, but these devastating images get optimized into the tens of thousands, and they're the first thing you see when you Google search an address. So I really applaud these types of apps, and I really applaud those builders that want to show their work and then want to take those credentials like building a fortified home or Energy Star or other programs out there that allow second and third parties access to your work. And then you spread that word, share it with the community. This is why my home is better. It's stronger, lasts longer, your life cycle cost is lower with energy, insurance premium reduction, And finally, overall peace of mind. That is priceless because, George, I cannot replace your memories, and I cannot replace that wedding dress and that frame and that thing that is so precious. And time again, when I work with victims of disaster, they're a victim of two disasters, maybe even three. The first one is that natural disaster or man-made, that fire, that flood. The second is just losing things that it doesn't matter if you had $1 million in content coverage, nothing can get back that cap, that gown, that wedding dress. That's devastating. And then there is a third disaster. We already mentioned it, picking the wrong person to put you whole again or to bounce forward and build you back better.
Yeah. And that may be the cost that you can't really calculate on a spreadsheet until it happens to you. But we learned making The Last House Standing. Now, some of this for legal reasons was not put in the film, but the amount of people that were ripped off by contractors that would swoop in that might not have been licensed. They charge thousands of dollars to put a tarp on a roof. They take control of your insurance money, so it has to go to them before they do the work. And then a lot of times they didn't do the work, or they did really horrible work. I mean, I know people there that literally lost hundreds of thousands of dollars from scams of crooks. And I equate after a storm to if you were outside on a summer night and you turn a light on and all the bugs and parasites that come out and are attracted to the light. That's what a disaster is. And you're going to get good people, first responders, neighbors that will rally to help you, but you're also vulnerable to all these scumbags.
George, you are, again, you're hitting the right buttons here for folks to know what that's gone through. And Move the World Films and has just been fantastic with whatever topic, especially with Last House Standing. They're trying to invite you in to say, this is what happens when you live in these zones or even near trees. And if you don't do your due diligence, if you don't get educated, if you don't have a plan, that's so important. You go to FEMA.gov, they have disaster plan kits. Yeah, not just water, a flashlight and whatnot. You need a lot when you are in a certain hazard zone. Know your risks, have a plan. And if you don't have that, look at what happens to the neighbors, knock on the door. Whether or not they say, never happened here or not, you can look even back further to records to say that these things will happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when. And when it happens, you do not want to be that victim of that second and third disaster. And that is, unfortunately, they get there faster. I kid you not, after Harvey, and I was from Corpus all the way up to Galveston, wherever there was pockets of windstorms, I'm driving through, shingle trucks were pulling in, and not a single shingle that I'd seen from these trucks were even rated in the wind zone. Secondly, they would just try to put these up as quick as possible, and they were doing it, again, without permits, no license, cash in hand, and I'll throw these shingles on your roof. Literally, they would blow off on the next storm, or you'd be lucky if they even stayed up, because these people that show up are opportunistic. Believe you me, there is no good deed that ever goes unpunished, and it is difficult because, frankly, real trades aren't even allowed to go into disasters that quickly, and it is very hard to recover. You may have no power. You may have hazardous conditions in your neighborhood, and literally, like you said, turning on that light, the flies and bugs come to it. They're there faster than even some of the insurance restoration contractors that are the good guys.
And you really can't. Yeah, you can't do the stuff at the last minute either. As our fire expert in the film, Bobby Milstein, pointed out, nobody woke up the day of the fire and came up with their plan. It needs to be done months in advance. Well, here in Tampa, Hurricane Preparedness Week was in May. It seems like that should be in January. It seems like that should be when you have time to actually step in and fix things. Because if you wait until the storm comes, now you're in survival mode as opposed to proactive preparation mode. And there's a big difference between those.
Well, history shows it. There's so many great sayings. I'm former military. I train for war and I pray for peace, not the other, not hope. I hope nothing happens because I am not ready. That strategy is never going to work in anything you do in life. So the only way that you are going to weather the storm is being prepared, knowing your risks, again, having a plan, from blankets to water, where are you going to meet, how do you escape, And then finally, heed the warnings. I know there's so many close calls that sometimes we get a little bit deaf to these sirens, right? But they're there for a reason. And you don't want to be that person that's left high and dry because you either didn't hear it or you didn't think it could happen to you. It can happen to you. There are enough folks out there, especially today. We're still dealing with that aftermath up in Jersey and New York and other states. It's unbelievable how much one system can do to an entire country. So really advocacy, education, getting the word out, knocking on the door, apps. There is enough information for an individual that wants to protect their interests to go out and learn and protect themselves. And furthermore,
go ahead.
Go ahead, George.
I was just going to say, if you had to tell people what the biggest hurdle is with what you do, what your biggest challenge is in trying to get people more resilient and trying to get them to have safer homes, what's the biggest hurdle that you think you face?
I would say, we mentioned it is the real estate process, be it new, be it buying a used home, how we acquire our property. There are many ways that you can get educated right at that point, but afterwards, it's going to be costly if you don't know your risks. And that has to do with even knowing the codes and the requirements. City government does a great job of advertising, but you have to go to the site. So knowing who to trust is super important to this. And along the way, you're borrowing. Do you need insurance A, B, C, and D? Now, if an agent doesn't have a checklist on the 5 things you need to buy there, you have to do that own due diligence. You have to ask those questions. A lot of times it's just going to the city hall. They will know above all. Secondly, going to that insurance agency. And you had mentioned, what's the biggest challenge here? Got to be careful because you can be overinsured. You want to have exactly what you need. And George, you want to audit that at least every year. Do I need this much? Should I have a little more? Will this change? Did I have more wealth, more to lose, and so on? So this is just good common sense to make sure you have the proper coverages, that you know exactly what it covers, and then looking at your deductible and your risk and doing that.
But you want to be careful where you save money. I'm sure you'll agree with this. What we saw in Malibu, California, a lot of people had houses that they had paid their mortgage off, so there wasn't a bank behind them. And so when you're not making those monthly payments, and maybe your house, you go, well, I paid $400,000 for it, so that's what you have it insured for. To rebuild that house might be $2 or $3 million. And people really need to understand what it is they're insuring.
Malibu dollars.
Yeah. And what the path back is once the disaster hits. You really have to understand that policy, because if you don't, it's just a false coverage. You're not really, you may think that, well, I paid the money, so I've got coverage. They're not going to just write you a check and say, here, Joel, we know you're damaged. Here's a few $1 million. You're screwed when that happens.
Absolutely. Folks are often shocked what today's prices, labor, material would cost to get you back whole again. And most insurance, if you don't have special riders or error emissions and code enforcement as codes ride up, will not go beyond what your limits are. And your limits could be off. And unfortunately, the only people that really keep an eye on that, and they do an okay job, is your mortgage company. Because if the bank owns your home along with you, and that insurance check is a fraction of the mortgage, boy, somebody should know right away. So it doesn't hurt to get if you are intimidated by the insurance side of it, if you don't understand flood insurance and whatnot, it never hurts to get the bank involved, because they do a little more due diligence, because they're investing in your property, in your community, and you may find better information down that side. But you certainly don't want to do that when you're in that middle of the disaster, because nobody wakes up thinking this is going to happen to me today. So a couple other things, you see, I want to point out is who's responsible. There's a lot of false hype on real estate prices. There's false hype on shows with flipping homes, how easy it may be, and just some paint and whatnot. And then finally, these big box stores used to be our biggest problem. You can roll into a big box, do-it-yourself center, and you're walking out of there putting in your own windows, but they should be shatter resistant or impact resistant. You're buying these wonderful louvers and storm drains that say they'll stop flooding and whatnot, but they're just not, cracked up to be. Or you get something in a can that you can spray and everything goes away. There's so many gimmicky things in there that make you feel that you have security. Again, you have to do your own due diligence. Finally, George, there's hope. Big box stores realize they can make money on disasters because all the things we just talked about, there's no money, there's no contractor. Big box stores are now getting the right products, rental equipment for floods, cleaning disinfectants. They're looking to the manufacturers, hey, we want to stock it because this is going to sell. Literally, if you go into some of these tool rental centers, you can get pumps and fans because unfortunately, the new sexy do-it-yourself is storm and water damage and fire damage restoration. And I hate to say that, but that's where we are today. So I know there's a silver lining in this big box store because you can get the right materials. Now, prior to it, it was more of that, we'll get you the pretty granite, peel and stick tile that looks like the real thing, but doesn't hold up. You're seeing folks having to pay out of pocket, renting their own, doing their own. And with that, the technology gets better. The offerings are a little bit better, but you better get there fast because after that flood, generators, equipment, cleaning equipment, fans are going to be gone quickly. And I know that you
better know what you're doing though, because it's not easy to clean up after a flood.
And you can't. And typically, depending on your age, what's flooded, you want an expert. But we're finding that either the contractors that could become, as we mentioned, experts overnight are getting these materials. But I'm seeing more and more contractors and just dealing with that, letting that water recede. And that's the only thing, George, that they can do. So yes, FEMA.gov has an entire list of recommendations. They have a whole building science department. You can look at fire cleanup. You can look at water damage. You can find out criteria like if it's glass or if it's wood or if it's porous or non-porous, if it's past 72 hours. There's a great guide out there that can take the very, very basic person who has never touched some of this and have a guide and an understanding, or find that qualified contractor and use that guide to make sure that contractor is doing everything that the guidelines state.
Hey, jumping back to that mortgage thing for a second, because in Malibu, the people who didn't have a mortgage, when it came time to try to get the money from the insurance company is a lot more likely to bully an individual than they are to bully a major bank or a major mortgage company.
That's
and
correct.
Because some of these people didn't have the resources to fight, they're going to have to go to court to get their insurance payment. So you don't want to get that false sense of confidence with insurance that it's going to be your end all. You really need to understand it.
That's correct. And knowing your policies. And there's been some gigantic, largest insurers in the country that enough people got together and say, well, wait a minute, this was a flood, but it was storm and wind surge that knocked my home down. So don't call us all flood because we have no flood insurance. That's where local officials, that's where even attorneys, George, I have met these attorneys, in some cases, licensed public adjusters that can pool together. This happened on this block, and ABC Insurance, you are going to do it because it is within your declaration pages. Strengthen numbers, talking to your neighbors. Unfortunately, you may be high and dry for a bit, but go down to the grassroots level, knock on the doors, communicate with the neighbors. They will have town hall meetings. That's where people gather after disasters. And then, yes, we hope that we have more of these before disasters. I have traveled throughout the United States with a lot of non-government organizations. There's local regionals, and we have went and had town hall meetings during what we call Sunny Day. And we get code officials. They come in and they always talk to the locals, say, guys, this is going to happen. Sun's out today. It's not going to be that way next month, and so on. These are the right folks. Get those connections made before the disaster. Get that plan in place. Know those good guys. Know who to call. And you're going to be in much better condition when that storm hits.
If you had to give an ultimate takeaway to somebody, I live in a house, or I'm thinking of buying a house or renting an apartment, what's the number one thing I should do right at the beginning?
The first thing I would do, get that zip code and start running it through websites on flood, fire, wind, history, building department, building characteristics, age. Do your own due diligence. Take the time that it would be to sip on a cup of tea or coffee and just dive a little bit deeper into the neighborhood, the history of it, be it from disasters to what's moving down the pike from a forestation, deforestation, dry climate weather, and then, communities. Do they have enough fire stations? Parks are beautiful, but look at what you have for your municipality and your infrastructure. Believe it or not, our next disaster moving up is power, it's water, and food scarcity. Do you have access? Does that gas station down the street have a backup generator for my generator on my home? Because what good is to have all these wonderful things and have no gas to run it and so on? So just those little things, start putting together those mental checks as you drive up and down and you're thinking, I love this neighborhood. Think about that. How close to groceries, to this, to what you need. Where is water? Because beauty has a price. And Mother Nature, she doesn't care. She doesn't care about you. She doesn't care. They're just it's just surviving. Just these storms, they don't ask questions. They just do what they're going to do. So understand that at any point in time, you could be faced with a disaster. And again, having that plan, as I mentioned, knowing your risks, and then getting that team together that can help you after or even before that disaster is really key here.
Now, you're one of the most optimistic guys I've met. Do you think we can get there? Is this all realistic, to have a time when a major storm or a fire or something will happen, and now we're talking about stories about a community that survived rather than all the ones that were destroyed?
For the last decade, I have dedicated every waking hour to telling those tales of how these buildings survive, and they're out there. 30 years ago, you would have met me either by design or by disaster. Today, I'm getting calls, emails. This is no joke. 2 weeks ago, a woman sends me an email. You must be psychic. Right where you said it would leak, it leaked, and this and that. And I'm glad we did this. And brings a smile on my face. That's one person, but I've impacted tens of thousands of people, and I know somewhere out there, showing someone the way, teaching someone, be it a municipal official or a carpenter who just found a better way to fasten a building, or using polyurethanes to glue. Every time we touch someone, we have a better story. We grow, and that person grows another 10, and so on and so forth. So spreading that word is growing that resilience proposition. And the word resilience, 10 years ago, I'm like, resilience, but like, what is that? I don't know. Today, it is morphed into people can be resilient. Products are resilient. And that is really what's making the difference. And finally, the best advice I can give anyone is surround yourself with people that will challenge you, that will push you to be a better builder, better real estate agent. Agents out there, there's good, there's bad, there's everything in between, but being a connector, connecting these folks. Maybe you had a bad experience with a builder. It's like, hey, you know what? Shame on you this time, but hey, you should meet and know this person. And that real estate agent specializes in flood and has an insurance flood salesperson that can help. Would be better to reveal this in the beginning and tell us all these perils than try to hide it. And then that person, because I got to tell you, every single time when I was doing home inspections 24/7, would they ever call if you didn't find something? Or would they say, boy, that agent didn't tell me and they recommended that inspector and so on. And there's a whole domino effect. It's the opposite these days. Great agent, inspector pointed out above and beyond, found all these issues. That's the world we live in when you surround yourself with the right people that challenge you, that can teach you, that do the due diligence. But greenwashing, you ever heard that term before?
I have not.
It's where someone wants to be green. Oh, I'm doing something for the environment. It's greener to buy this product over that product. It got to be such a trend that people would say, I painted this green. It's safer and better. They would overuse it and wash it only to fool you into thinking you were doing something environmentally conscious when really you're just lining the pocket of a smart person who used an ad to influence you. We're seeing that in services. We're seeing that in building. So make sure the products and the contractors are certified by a credible body, government or non-government, that are proving they're delivering results that someone else can verify. And I challenge people, if you were to Google Joel W. May, my name, you're going to see the agencies and the people. You'll click on that link, you'll see my license. You'll click on another link, you will see that I'm a certified fortified rater, that I have endorsements and people, and I'm really the real deal. And there's pages of it. But, you start, just take that minute. It's like, I haven't heard of this. I haven't heard of you. I haven't heard of the product. There's something probably going on there where they're washing you to make you feel good about it. So even if you do your due diligence, you got to take that extra step and trust, but verify.
Yeah, as our buddy Aris Papadopoulos pointed out to me when we were making the film, he goes, if you have to build it twice, it's not green. So you can think you have the most green house. When that blows away and gets obliterated by a storm, you've just done the opposite of anything green, because now you're having to put it all back.
Absolutely. And there's different levels of that. And that's about sustainability, resilience, build it once, build it right. And then I love these sayings, fix it once or fix it 1,000 times or fix it for life, right? Yeah. So you gotta take all those sayings, keep them in the back of your head. The good guys do win. You got to look for them, but it's growing, as I mentioned earlier, from 0 to 30,000 fortified, genuinely built, stronger buildings, third-party verified, delivered even by Habitat for Humanity at the same cost of normal construction. There's success story upon success story. As I just mentioned, Habitat. You can go to their sites. You can find them. They got this Habitat Strong. And near that last house standing were a few other insulated concrete form homes built by Habitat that stood up just as well. And were for the moderate to lower income folks out there. So it is possible, it's achievable, and it's being done every day.
All right, last question. If you were giving advice to somebody out there who doesn't feel like they're making a difference either in their job or in their personal life, what would you tell them they should do, the first step to try to do something to move the world?
Small steps can have significant impact. The more hands on that lever, the more people can help you move that world, and really lead by that example. Anything you discover, you see, share. And ultimately that individual, whether they know it or not, they are going to be the change that they're going to see in the world. People are happy when they save money, when they save lives, and they shout to the top of their lungs in some cases. But we need to highlight those things. And that individual needs to get that message out and connect to the people that could be a victim of that next natural disaster.
Right. Hey, Joel, thank you so much for doing the podcast today. I appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. And again, thank you for all you do. The Last House Standing is fantastic. If viewers out there haven't seen it, please take a look at it. Lots of resources in the beginning and the end. Get educated, have a plan, and let's not meet each other, okay? Let's stick to these meetings, and I would not want to meet you in person unless you're wanting to design a safer, better environment. Thank you, George.
Thanks, Joel. That's going to do it for this week's Move the World podcast. You can see on my t-shirt here, the logo for Move the World Films and Move the World is two people with a lever trying to move the world. And as Joel is talking about, sometimes it takes a lot of hands on there. Sometimes it's just your hands. And if you keep moving it, you'll start to see a difference eventually, and it really pays off. We'll see you next time.